Just in a moment. Okay, let us start. So, see, what are the disadvantages of projective techniques? We discussed the advantages. In that, we discussed that it increases the validity. It is helpful, for example, in the context of hidden motivations. If you want to uncover the example, one of the examples that I shared with you was that suppose your mobile phone, you want to find out that why are people buying expensive mobile phones, why is somebody wearing a particular type of clothing, why people wear designer clothing, why people buy expensive cars. So in all these, or why people buy luxury products or luxury brands. So in those contexts, at times we have to resort to these. So these are advantages. So they help us in eliciting those kind of responses which people may not be willing to share when we are using the direct methods. So that is why we resort to these indirect methods. So then there are disadvantages also as far as these techniques are concerned. So one of the biggest disadvantage is that we require somebody who should be a trained individual, who can carry out this kind of interaction for us. Then another issue would be whatever responses are emerging from that individual, from the subject, they have to be analyzed by somebody who is a skilled interpreter, somebody who is an expert interpreter. So again, I'll repeat that the moment somebody is interpreting, subjectivity would be there, and then there are chances of interpretation bias again appearing or creeping in or affecting your research findings. So chances of bias are very high. Then, of course, when responses are emerging in the form of words, phrases, paragraphs, or interpretation of pictures, so what happens is that interpretation is generally difficult, and it is prone to subjectivity. So it will be subjective based upon who the interviewer, who that individual is who's carrying out that kind of interaction. Now, if we compare these various methods, see, this is the picture that emerges. What is happening is that when we are failing as far as the direct methods are concerned, then only we try to go for these indirect methods. Then these kind of methods are generally more appropriate for use during the initial stages of the research, or during the exploratory stage, or the exploratory phase of the study, where you are trying to understand a problem, where you are trying to gain additional insights into something that is of interest to you. Then see these methods, that is projective techniques, as we have been discussing, they are a bit complex, so they should be used very intelligently, and they should not be used carelessly by the researcher. Then if you look at the comparison, see, this is an interesting comparison that emerges as far as these various methods are concerned. Just have a look at the guidelines which are there as far as these three methods that broadly that we have discussed up to now, and then I'll discuss the next part. First, have a look at this. See, if you look at the first, if you look at the criteria, let us start from the criteria. If you look at the criteria, we have say degree of structure, probing of the individual respondents. Then we have the bias from the point of view of moderator, from the point of view of interpretation bias. Then whether they are advantageous or not from the point of view of uncovering the subconscious motives or information that you desire. Then whether the information that you are getting is innovative, is somewhat different from the regular methods, or which method is more appropriate for uncovering, say, things which are sensitive. Then if, for example, you are trying to probe behavior which is unusual behavior, see the example of shoplifting that I shared with you. If you are going in for probing of these kind of unusual or behaviors, then which particular method is more appropriate, then overall usefulness, which method is better. So see, if you look at the criteria, you will find that as far as degree of structure is concerned, in case of focus groups, it is high. Why is it high? If you recall, we discussed that in case of focus groups, the purpose of the study is known, so that is why the structure is higher, is more structured. In case of death interviews also, the structuring is there, more of structuring, and if you compare to projective techniques is there, but if you compare to focus groups, it is lesser. Then as far as probing of individual respondents is concerned, see, focus groups, individual level probing is not happening because we are trying to probe at the group level. Whereas as far as depth interviewing is concerned, see, we are probing on a one-to-one basis, so that is why it allows us more to go in for more in-depth probing. And as far as projective techniques are concerned, we say that medium advantage is there as far as this aspect is concerned. From the point of view of biases, if you look at moderator bias, see, the maximum bias will be there in case of, say, depth interviews, and of course it hovers from low to high in case of projective techniques. But in case of focus groups, we find that relatively it is lesser than if you compare to the depth interviews. In the context of interpretation, you will find that the issues that we encounter or the interpretation bias is low if you compare to depth interviews in case of focus groups, but it is high as far as projective techniques are concerned. Because remember, in case of projective techniques, the purpose of the study is not revealed to the subjects. So that is why what happens is, at times the responses which are appearing before you and which you are supposed to interpret, then you as a researcher also encounter difficulty in that. Now, as far as uncovering of the subconscious is concerned, projective techniques are the most advantageous, because see, if you recall, we were discussing that it allows you role playing. It allows you third person technique is also procedure is also available, where you can project your feelings onto others. So that is why it is said that it is more advantageous from the point of view of uncovering the subconscious motives. Then obtaining sensitive information, again projective techniques are considered to be better. As far as unusual behavior is concerned, in case of projective techniques, yes, they are more advantageous. They can be of great help to us. As far as overall usefulness is concerned, focus groups are considered to be more advantageous in overall usefulness. And second best, you can say, are depth interviews, and third best in this case are the projective techniques. Then you have the various types of survey methods. I've just tried to place them together so that we can just have a look at what are the various survey methods which are being used by researchers for the purpose of generating primary data. So we can go for telephone interviewing. Now, in case of telephone interviewing, two possibilities exist. We can go for traditional methods, or we can go for computer-assisted telephone interviewing, which is referred to as CATI, C-A-T-I, computer-assisted telephone interviewing. So in case of telephone, suppose you just call somebody and you have a hard copy version of the questionnaire before you. You keep posing the queries and the person keeps responding, and you keep putting tick marks, or you keep recording the responses. This is one possibility. The other possibility is that what is happening, in case of you call the help center of a particular mobile service provider. So immediately the person on the other side has your mobile number before him or her. Then you will find that whatever queries you have, based upon your queries, the person will be feeding some information onto a screen which is there, and then based upon the questions that will be asked, some other screens pop up on the side of that individual before that individual on the screen, and then the interaction proceeds further. Now, in case of telephone-based interviewing also, or computer-assisted telephone interviewing, what happens is that you have before you as a researcher a screen on which the options are provided, and then you read out the question, the options, and then whatever response is coming or from the side of that subject, you record it, and based upon the response, the subsequent question appears before you on the screen. That is on your side, because see, you are interviewing using the telephone. So computer assisted telephone interviewing allows you to go for branching type of questions. Now, what are branching type of questions? Suppose you want to probe and you want to find out that which particular type of vehicle does the person own. So if the person owns a two-wheeler, subsequent questions that will be appearing on the screen will be related to two-wheelers. If the person owns a four-wheeler, it will be related to four-wheeler. Suppose the person, you have a list of products, and the person says that I own only 3 of these out of a list of 5. Of course, let me again remind you that the number of options that you have in case of computer assisted or whether it is traditional telephone interviewing, the number of options and the length of the questions should be short. The number of options should be less. They should not be more than 5, because when you read out from the other side, if the question is lengthy or if the options are too many, the person may forget. The person may not be able to, as such, share with you the correct response. And so in case of computer-assisted personal interviewing, let me repeat, the advantage, one of the greatest advantages is that you can record the responses then and there. You can go in for branching type of questions. Now, there is another type of procedure that we use for generating primary data, that is, personal interviewing. In case of personal interviewing, it can be interviewing that is done by you at the home of that subject. It can be a mall intercept, generation of data, or it can be computer assisted personal interviewing. Now, computer assisted personal interviewing and computer assisted telephone interviewing are very similar to each other. The only difference is that in case of computer assisted personal interviewing, when you are interacting with the subject, you are physically present or you are virtually present when you are interacting with that subject. And here also you are having a device where the responses can be recorded. So it can be a palm top, or it can be a tablet, or it can be a laptop, it can be a touch sensitive device, or it can be your mobile device. So you record the responses then and there. Again, if you're using, let me repeat, if you're going in for computer assisted personal interviewing or computer assisted telephone interviewing, in both the cases, the advantage is the responses are recorded by you then and there, and branching type of questions are possible and they can easily be implemented. Then you have mall interviewing happening. So in case, mail interviewing happening. In case of mail interviewing, you can send it through email. Because there are different variants which are available nowadays. So that's why we can also discuss it under electronic interviewing, or within mail also. Some of the textbooks you will find that they're mentioning this. So it can be through mails, that is, you send your questionnaire with a cover note using speed post or courier services to the subjects, and then you expect some kind of response from them. Or you may be having a mail panel. There are certain organizations even in India which are maintaining a mail panel, that they have a list of individuals who have agreed to be part of the mail panel. And just like what we discussed in case of longitudinal designs, the panels which are being maintained by research organizations. So here mail panels are being maintained by research organizations, and they can be approached intermittently for the purpose of providing responses to questions which questionnaires or research instruments which are being shared with them. Then we can go for electronic interviewing. We can go for internet-based surveys. For example, we host a questionnaire on a particular website, or we can send our questionnaire as a text in a mail, or we can send it as a file attachment in our email, and then we expect the person to provide us responses. Now, and which of these is advantages? See, it depends upon which country you are carrying out the survey. In certain countries, mail interviewing procedures are more advisable to be used. For example, in certain European countries, researchers have found that people are not very willing to entertain you at their homes or outside office. So they say that if you want to have any kind of interviews, or if you want to discuss anything, or if you are carrying out some kind of research, just send me the questionnaire and I will respond to it through mail. Or it can be email or through snail mail, but they are not very positive as far as personal visits are concerned. But in certain countries, it has been noted that mail-based surveys, they do not they are not very revealing, they are not very advantageous. Another issue may be that of the response rate. So in case of mail surveys, the response rates are quite low. So you may have you may have to go for repeat administration. You may have to send reminders. For example, when you send your mail based your questionnaire through mail to say 100 respondents, in the first go, do not expect more than 10 responses. If you go in for say a reminder mail and send them the questionnaire again, then maybe you can jack up the response rate to 20%. So very rarely you will find that more than 20% response rate is there as far as mail-based surveys are concerned. In case of email-based surveys, the advantage is that it is comparatively easier for you to resend the mail, or you can even program it using your servers. So after some interval, a reminder mail is sent to the subjects who have not responded. So it depends which mode you are using. But remember that mail-based surveys, whether they are electronic, email-based, or whether they are snail mail-based, the response rates are quite low. You will find that in case of telephone-based surveys also, the liberty that the person has on the other side is that the person can simply put down the phone, and then it becomes difficult for you to reconnect. So in case of personal interviews, what happens is that you are physically present. When you are physically present, the person cannot escape as such. Person cannot run away when the person has agreed to interact with you on a face-to-face basis. So the greatest advantage that we have is in case of personal interviews vis-a-vis probing. Why? Because we are also observing the facial expressions. Then because we are physically present, we can immediately react to a particular response which has emerged as a researcher, and then maybe we can rephrase it, or we can clarify things then and there when we are present. Suppose the respondents feel any difficulty in understanding the questions, which is not possible in case of other methods. So, this slide presents a comparison of the various methods, that is mail-based, personal, and different telephone-based methods in the context of various criteria which are there. For example, we generally try to understand from the point of view of interviewer bias, the control over the data collection, the depth of interviewing, which one is more economical, which one allows us to go in for follow-ups. Then which one is more advantageous if we are trying to find out something about data or hard to recall data, where in which particular procedure a good rapport can be developed by you with the subjects. Then sampling competencies, for example, which one is more advantageous from that point of view. Then from the speed of obtaining responses and the versatility. So see, 1 means most effective and 3 means least effective. So the picture is clear before you, and just read it, and we can have questions. I will be taking questions regarding what we have covered up to now. Yes, please. Please, if you have questions, you are welcome. Yes, I'm waiting for questions from your side.
It was all clear.
It was all clear. So nice. Thank you. Okay. One test which was referred to in one of the previous slides was thematic apperception test. So this test is very interesting, and I thought that I should be sharing just in one slide something about it with you. This thematic apperception test is also referred to as TAT, TAT test. So this was developed by Henry Murray and Morgan at Harvard, and this particular test, projective test, is very widely used by researchers, And again, remember that it helps us in tapping or uncovering the subconscious of our respondents. And it is of help to us, for example, in understanding the personality of the subjects. And popularly, this is also referred to as the picture interpretation technique. Picture interpretation technique. So the criticism of this test is that some researchers say that it is unscientific because whatever findings you're arriving at, they are subject to a lot of interpretation bias, a lot of subjectivity is there, and it cannot be proved to be valid or reliable. But still, it is being used very widely. In fact, the service staff selection board of India also uses it. Several armies of the world, they use it. So this is very popular. A subject may be asked, for example, now what exactly is this picture interpretation technique? So what you do is that you show to the subjects a series of pictures which may be provocative, which may be say at the same time ambiguous. So a number of such pictures are shown to the subjects, and then you ask them to tell a story about those pictures. So you first expose them to a series of pictures, and then these pictures are standard series of pictures. So then what you do is that you expect that the subjects, or you instruct them to tell a story about those pictures to which they are being exposed to. So you expect that they will be sharing with you that what resulted, or because of what this particular thing happened that is being shown in that picture, and what exactly is shown in that picture. What exactly are the characters feeling in that picture? What are the characters thinking in that picture? Then you also ask them to imagine that what would likely be the outcome of this scenario. So this particular method, some researchers use 31 picture cards for this. Some use less, some use more, but in general, the standard suggested version has 31 picture cards. And these cards generally have male or female, or sometimes both, or sometimes it is very difficult for you to make out what is the gender of those images which are there. Sometimes they will be using children also, and some show no human figures at all. So sometimes a card may be blank, totally blank in this. So they will be asking you to make up a picture, make up a story about it, and then based upon what you are interpreting using those pictures, they will be trying to make out something about your personality, that what is your personality type, because it's very important from the point of view of at times organizations. It is also very important from the point of view of the government entities, like for example the various armies of the world, that they are able to understand your personality, and then only they will be deciding to recruit you. Okay, with this we are through with this primary data, and then I'll introduce you to now to another interesting. You see, this is the thematic apperception test that I shared with you, and these, as I was sharing with you, that depending upon the situation, we may use it. So if you, for example, you want to know more about the personality of that individual, so you may use this TAT test or thematic apperception test or picture interpretation technique. And as the name itself is indicating, picture interpretation. So see, the person is interpreting, and then from what the person is interpreting, you as a researcher will be interpreting something about that individual. So subjectivity would be there. Remember, subjectivity would be there, but still it is popular, still it is being used very widely the world over. So let me just stop this, and I'll introduce you to a new section, and that new section will be second part of this interaction. And in fact, that second part is that we'll be discussing something about the secondary data sources, and what do you mean by secondary data, and in which situations do we use that secondary data. Okay. So we will discuss this, and under the secondary data, we will try to Let me just list out what all we'll be discussing. Basically, we'll be discussing about here the first of all, what do you mean by this secondary data? Then we'll be discussing about you see why exactly we require this secondary data. We'll be discussing about what are the differences between primary data and secondary data. We will also discuss that in which settings, which of them is more advantageous, where exactly we use. We will also be discussing that what are the drawbacks of using secondary data, and then what are the issues as far as use of these secondary data is concerned. Then we will also see that how these secondary data are classified and what are the sources of these secondary data. So, but before I proceed, let me caution you that at times we tend to commit mistake in the sense that we write datas. See, datum, D-A-T-U-M is singular and data is plural. So do not use datas at any place. The moment you use data, it is assumed you should be using data are available, not sometimes we have. Now you will find that in the textbooks also they say data is, but data is plural itself, it's plural, so data should never be used. And when you are referring to a single data, single points of data, that is datum, D-A-T-U-M, data. Okay, now let us discuss that what are these secondary data. See, first of all, we remember that we discussed research designs. So once we are clear about a particular type of design, then what we have to do is that we have to decide that what kind of procedure we will be using, what kind of method we will be using to generate the data or to generate the information, how we'll be collecting that information so that the objectives of the study are met. So broadly, we have two types of data. So let us see that what are these two types of data. Broadly we have two types, primary and secondary data. So we'll keep keep discussing about primary and secondary data and see what are these and what why is it necessary for us to understand. Because see, primary data are gathered, as we discussed in the earlier interaction. They are gathered by the researcher or they are generated by the researcher for the purpose of solving some problem which they are right now grappling with, which they are trying to address currently. So the data are generated from the point of view of that problem. As far as secondary data are concerned, remember this data was generated, or these data have not been generated by you. This data has been generated by some other researcher for some other purpose, for solving some other problem. So these data or secondary data, why people use this? Because they help us in gaining an understanding before we actually start generating our own primary data. So sometimes what we do is that we first go through the available literature in the domain. Based upon that, we decide that what are the variables of interest to us, and then we may also decide to go in for an exploratory study. We may try to understand that what are the issues which are important from the side of the subjects or our respondents. And once we have got these insights, then we may decide or we may design our own questionnaire. And then we may use that questionnaire to generate data, primary data, which may be subsequently be analyzed by us. Now, as far as secondary data are concerned, remember they are quite often historical. This data are already assembled. They may be appearing, for example, in a newspaper. They may be appearing. This data may be there available in a magazine. It may be in the form of a research paper. It may be in the form of a review article. It may be available on a website. It may even be, the secondary data may also even a television program, for example, or a radio program. Whatever you are witnessing or whatever you are hearing, that may also be considered to be secondary data, and that you can be referred by you even in your research. So I'm repeating that whatever you are viewing on television, whatever you are viewing, for example, or listening, for example, in case of a radio program, that also can be referred by you, and that will be categorized as secondary data. It can be referred by you. I will discuss later at some stage the procedure that is to be followed in referring to these sources, that is television as a source or radio as a source. And then in your research, or for example, a website can be a source, somebody's lecture may be a source for that matter, and all there are procedures for referring to all these sources, and that we'll be discussing later. So the advantage of this secondary data is that we don't need to access the respondents, and in fact before we actually start generating our own data, as I was sharing with you, it is always advisable that we first browse through and go carefully go through the available secondary sources, so that we better understand the problem which is being addressed by us. Then you see, this is the comparison of primary data and secondary data. Let us see that how the researchers have tried to compare. See, the researchers have tried to compare in terms of collection of purpose, the collection process that we adopt, the cost that we incur as far as collection is concerned, the time that will be required for collecting or generating the data. So you will agree that primary data, as far as purpose is concerned, the idea is that you generate it to solve problem that you are facing currently. Secondary data was generated for some other purpose by some other researcher. Now, as far as process is concerned, you have to be very deeply involved in it as a researcher. I'm talking in the context of primary data. But as far as secondary data is concerned, it's very obvious that it is already existing. It is existing as in the newspaper. It is existing, for example, in a magazine, for example, in the form of an article, or for example, as a research paper. So it's already there. So it will be rapid and easy for you. As far as cost is concerned, primary data, it's always costly. It will always be time consuming. So whereas secondary data, you will agree that you can easily or relatively, less of cost will be involved there, and the time required will be less. Though, of course, certain studies or certain reports which are compiled by syndicated service organizations, they may be very costly. Sometimes reports they may be costing $2,000, they may be costing $20,000, but of course they may be related to sectors which are where the people have that kind of deep pockets where they can pay for these kind of reports. For example, in the petroleum industry, so you may find that some of the reports which are compiled by experts, for example, they tell us, they provide us deep insights regarding where the oil can be found, or for example, some details regarding some problems with oil companies facing. So a particular report or some kind of information or some data which they are after, that may be costing even millions of dollars to them. So those are exceptions, but in general, from our point of view, we can say that as far as secondary data are concerned, they are relatively less costly if you compare to the researcher himself or herself generating primary data. Then, as far as secondary data are concerned, remember that we are in this case, what is happening is that we are trying to identify the problem. We are trying to understand the problem. We are trying to define the problem. So for all those purposes, if you recall, I've been repeating in exploratory research design, we are trying to understand, we are trying to probe in depth, and how we can do it. What we can do is that we have to first take the help of secondary sources so that we understand the problem, and then only we should be going in for either focus group or depth interviews or projective techniques. Before we have done our homework, and what is that homework? We should have gone through sufficient existing literature, and then only we should proceed further. Then only we should be going in for these methods. In this case, as far as uses are concerned, we can develop an approach to the problem. We can, for example, identify that which particular design will be more appropriate. We can identify that what are the variables of interest. We can also, frame the research questions, and we can also decide on what kind of hypothesis should be framed. Then it can be remember that during the exploratory phase, we crystallize the hypothesis. But how should we phrase that hypothesis? In that context, existing literature can be of great help to us. Then we can also, secondary sources also help us in interpreting the results of some study that we have done. As if you recall, we discussed at some point that the outcome of the study may be such that it may require exploratory study. So before we proceed to the exploratory phase, what we have to do is that to interpret or to better understand the results of a study where we had ourselves generated primary data, we may have to take the help of secondary sources. So with this, I'll be stopping. And then if you have questions up to this point, you are welcome. Yes, please. If there are any questions, you are welcome. You can ask. We have 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.